going strong and learning a lot from each other. And I'm really excited to hear from our next speaker, Professor Dr. Silvia Toscano, who has been teaching at Pasadena City College for many, many years. I've had the privilege of meeting Silvia. It's been a while since I've seen you in person, but so inspired the last time I saw you at an old Raza Studies Now conference. But I'm very inspired by your work. I've read it many times before in a critical teacher inquiry groups, and have been fed by a lot of what you've produced for us as educators. I'm going to read Dr. Silvia's biography. She is a Chicana Mexicana who is currently self-actualizing through ancestral cosmic connections, looking to undo colonizing stigmas surrounding empowerment of feminine energies and creative expressions. Her ancestry is rooted in Michoacán, Durango and Chihuahua, Mexico. She earned her PhD in Chicana and Chicano Studies from UC Santa Barbara in 2016 and has over 20 years of teaching experience at the community college level, as well as high school and university, where she centers culturally relevant and responsive curriculum in the service of humanizing pedagogies and transformation. In 2013, she published the article, Teaching as a Healing Craft, Decolonizing the Classroom and Creating Spaces of Hopeful Resistance Through Chicano Indigenous Pedagogical Praxis in the Journal of Urban Review. She's the co-editor of In Search of Our Brown Selves, a transdisciplinary college reader, where she is also a contributing author. So excited to hear from you today, Silvia.
Gracias a todos y a todas, Todexis. It's really a privilege to be here. I'm getting a lot, I'm receiving a lot, so thank you so much. I hope I'm also able to give and work in that reciprocal way. Thank you those that are here, that have been here from the beginning, and those that are just joining in. Also want to acknowledge that Jeremy Gonzalez is here from the Keech Nation. So thank you, brother, for being here. Or at least he was a little while ago. Okay. Just want to acknowledge that in the spirit of what was shared earlier and being in community with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yeah. I'm going to share my screen and, okay, from the beginning, ¿verdad? And hopefully I could just move with my arrow. Can I try that? Yes, it works. So the title of this presentation is In Search of Our Brown Selves as a Racially Equitable Student Learning Outcome. So this is the book that Ron mentioned. That's a recent publication. It actually came out in 2011, was our first go at it, and then we revised it. It was a labor of love, and many of the contributors are present here. Elia, Santiago, Claudia. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful ofrenda, and it's a transdisciplinary college reader. And real quick, we were very intentional about making the release date August 12th, which is exactly 1 year ago, which was the day that's recorded in history of Cuauhtemoc giving his final speech. So I just want to acknowledge that that for our time together. It's a significant day to be in community and to be sharing that we're still here and we're still resisting and we're still creating, right? And we're doing that collectively. So muchas gracias for the opportunity to be here. And so I'm going to get right into the questions, and some things I'm going to go, a little faster through, and some things I'll take a little bit more time with. And I'm really grateful that, the beginning of the Encuentro started with storytelling, listening to Jessa recount her memories as a young girl, in classrooms that were exhibiting racial discrimination, right, against Indigenous students. And so those stories are so powerful because they mark us. And my time as an educator, for over 20 years has been marked by a lot of institutional racism. And so I'm really grateful that I can share, some of those experiences and how I've responded to them, right? Hold on. So what does my commitment to racial justice look like in my practice as an associate professor at Pasadena City College? Looks three different ways. So one of them is contributing to knowledge production in the form of scholarly text. And scholarly text would be like the co-edited version of In Search of Our Brown Selves, Teaching as a Healing Craft, which no one had mentioned before. And I've got a new one coming out this year called Recognizing Learning Spirits as a Way to Decolonize Scholarship, Teaching and Student Servingness. So I really think it's important to be active, in contributing to knowledge, right? It's time consuming and takes a lot of energy to produce those texts. But I think it's important for our voices to be out there, and we can impact change in that way también. Another way is by mentoring and advising Raza students, as well as those who center Indigenous ways of being and knowing. So, just being present when Mecha was still active at PCC, I was an advisor there, even across campuses at UCLA with the Eagle and the Condor Liberation Front. And then we had a living, it was called the Intertribal Living Culture student organization. It lasted a little bit, and it was, an honor to be working with students that are doing this as well. On top of being students, they're organizing and they're creating events, and they're making space and they're making room for themselves and their practices and what they think is important. Really asserting their own autonomy and demanding that the institution, make space for them. So it's really a pleasure to work with those students. And then taking on leadership positions that allocate grant funds for culturally relevant and responsive student programming, as well as professional development. And so I was really grateful when Cynthia talked about that, right? Like, I can only make change in my classroom. No, right? We can make change in many different ways. So I'm going to talk about that. And I think that's what my next slides are. So, I've been involved, as soon as I learned that I could apply for grants on campus, I went for it. And it was interesting how that all happened, because I didn't know, you don't know what you don't know as a new hire. Todo eso, I got hired in 2005 full time. I didn't know. I was told by my mentor to be quiet until I got tenure, So it wasn't until later, Dr. Beverly Tate, she mentioned to me, you can apply for these college diversity grants. And they were at that time like $3,000. And I was like, what? I could apply for a grant and get some money to bring speakers and, what? So I jumped on that, and there's so much funding. You're going to hear me emphasize that time and time again throughout the presentation. But these are some of the things that we did, in the last few years. An evening of storytelling, with the elders, Mona Shada and Hank Jones. They talked about their experiences in solitary confinement and a vision quest ceremony. We brought in La Maestra Berenice Dimas to talk about transforming our wounds con palabras. She brought in tea, and we had a vegan comida. It was really a beautiful experience, that one. And then we brought in we got to do a beginner's náhuatl class también, so these are things that we can do to enhance what's happening in the classroom and to really give students access, right? Jessa also talked about her family being really key in exposing her to knowledge. So sometimes that happens in families and sometimes it doesn't. But we as educators or people who can have access, as she mentioned, we have privilege, right? So we can access and we can make sure that everything is being done to represent our students, in accurate ways. And I'll talk about this one real quick. This was our first Indigenous Peoples Day event back in 2018. It's called Sembrando, I can't see the top of my thing. Sembrando Memorias de Nuestras Raíces, Planting Memories of Our Roots. And so this is a very pivotal example of institutional racism. I had put in the request like in August to reserve the art gallery. It's called the Boone Art Gallery at PCC, because we were gonna, the event was gonna center around this artist, Mario Cibaja, and those are giant wooden panels. His murals are wooden panels, right? And so I was like, let's bring him to the gallery and we can bring these amazing, you know, works of art, and we can do dialogues. We can do a whole, like, you know, programming around this. And so I did a formal statement, letterheaded y todo, and got no response. And then I followed up, and then there was like, oh, well, you actually have to put your request in 3 years in advance. And I was like, you know what, then let me put it in right now for 2021. If we're gonna go that route, you know, in alignment with the 500 years, you know, 1521, we're still here, y nada. And so, but they'll put all kinds of other stuff in that gallery with no problem. And the fact that I didn't even get a response really made the message clear. Like, you do not support diversity, inclusivity, equity, especially when it comes to our Indigenous traditions, right? And it's such a contradiction when I get to the next few things that I'm going to say. But, you know, in Chicano studies style, the students broke it down. The artists came. We were all unpacking stuff from the vans, you know, and we recreated this event center that we have on campus called Creveling Lounge. We turned it into an art gallery. We turned it into a ceremonial danza space. You know, we turned it into a Mesoamerican sound bath. You know, it was a beautiful, beautiful event. And we just had to do it, you know, because they weren't gonna, and these are huge murals, right? So they had to like install them with hammers and nails y todo. And it was worth it though. You know, all that hard work was worth it. Oh, and I wanted to kind of just put it out there for everybody as I'm sharing, you know, think, like, reflect on your own experiences with institutional racism, and whether or not you've had access to cultural events and programming as a student, as a faculty member, you know, with professional development, and those types of things, you know, and we do have to support each other in making sure that we all understand these things are possible. Es una lucha, like, we're not even close to being there yet. But just, I wanted to share some examples to kind of show where my efforts go, right, outside of the classroom. And so the next question was, oh shoot, how do es que quiero quitar el little thing on top. I can't see the top of my, let's see if I can move it. There you go. So how do you address issues of race, racism, and injustice? So my current role, in addition to being a faculty member, is I'm on reassigned time to be the faculty lead for one of our grants, right? So these community colleges have lots and lots of grants. And when you have HSI status, which means that you have 25% or more quote unquote Hispanic students, which I'm going to talk all about in a minute, you get a lot of money, right? And that's where my problem is, because these schools are getting so much funding because of who goes there. But the programming that's offered is ridiculous, right? It's 0 to none, and whatever is being done is like pretending to be culturally relevant and responsive. So we have 2, and they each have $3 million. Over 5 years, they're granted $3 million. So that's $6 million in 5 years. And these grants, I'm part of putting career first and expanding the network of care. And so on the website, I won't go there now, but on the website, there's a little diagram, like a Venn diagram, and it says that the priorities of the grants are to be race conscious, identity affirming, and culturally sustaining. And I question, like, how? Like, how, right? And so I was at a meeting one time, and it was interesting to me that the people, like the researchers on campus, it's called the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and they did a study, and the results of the study were very interesting to me. Let me see if I could go there. So it's called the Expanded Ancestry, Finding Clusters in Ancestry Data. Let me see if I can do it. Of course I can't. Let me see. I don't want to take time. Okay. Well, I'd have to stop share and then share again. Okay, I won't do that. But the data helps illustrate that the majority of Hispanic students, the students that are labeled Hispanic at our campus, actually self-identify as Mexican and of Mexican ancestry. So when you click on the link, it's going to take you to this page, and this page has many squares, many squares. And the biggest square is the square that says a certain amount of students, I think it was like over 5,000, self-identified as Mexican and of Mexican ancestry. That's the wording that the students use themselves, right? And so there are other ones like Nicaraguan came up a lot, El Salvador came up a lot, Guatemala también. And so there's these different combinations. And I just found it very interesting that the largest squares have Mexican and of Mexican ancestry there. That's the terminology that the students are using, right? And so I think that that's important to highlight. One, because, you know, terms like Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx serve to de-emphasize the indigenous origins of our largest and continuously most misrepresented and underserved student populations. Obviously, there's also more work to be done in affirming the indigeneity of Mexican students, right? I think Santiago has done a lot of work in that area también with some of his publications. But, you know, it comes back to the events, right? So if this is who's coming to the campus, like, how are we being identity affirming to those students who are the majority of students at my campus? How are we ensuring culturally sustaining efforts, right? And how are we being race conscious of these Mexican students, right? Students that are self-identifying as Mexican, like, how are we doing that? And so one of the things that I did también was, I thought it was really important, if I was going to work on this grant, to be proactive in challenging the Hispanic label in particular. So I drafted a statement of affirmation of Indigenous origins, and I contacted Dr. Saintly, you know, who we all know and love, and had him read through the document, and he helped me with a few sentences and, you know, gave me the reassurance that I was in my right to, you know, create the statement. So some of the things that I wrote about in the statement are: indigeneity is an important focal point to highlight, especially given the recent dissemination of the 2020 census. People were informed they were required by law to submit their response, either electronically or by mail. And so according to the census, if one is to identify as Mexican, Mexican American, and or Chicano, or for that matter, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Salvadoran, Dominican, Colombian, Guatemalan, Spaniard, Ecuadorian, one must also by default agree to Hispanic or Latin origins. Emphasis on the word origins. So, and the school is, you know, lapping that up and going right into that logic también. And so to serve our students, you know, Cynthia talked about equity. So we must respect and not impose their origins of it or identity, especially those that have been a focus of erasure and misrepresentation for centuries, whereby the many thousands of years represented by their indigenous history, knowledge, and cultures has been and continues to be disappeared. As advocates of equity outcomes and social justice in education, it is important that we commit to continued learning, unlearning, and relearning to be of true service to our largest and most diverse student population with respect to this next 7 generations, right? My statement never made it to the website. I've insisted on it several times and it's not there. So who knows why? I think we all know why. And then, you know, I'll maybe want to reflect on that a little bit también in the chat. So how do I ensure that my most marginalized students are addressed? This is kind of like my knowledge. One of the facilitators asked us to think about, like, okay, pick some things that you're going to share with people, and then also talk about the knowledge that supports it. So for me, Chicano studies is foundational. I was hired to teach English in 2005. I went back in 2009 to get a second degree in Mexican American Studies at Cal State LA. And then I went back in 2011 to get the PhD in Chicana and Chicano Studies. So, but I was hired to teach English, but all of my English courses are infused with the Chicano Studies framework. And so it's foundational because it, at least for me and in my practice, it centers amor propio, right? Self-love, to be authentic and to be unapologetic about who you are and where you come from, right? It also, my practice also is inclusive of ethnic identity development. So family exposures. So how, yeah, some of us are lucky to be enculturated, right? And we have comida, and we have celebrations, and we have language, right? And we have practices. Some people are not fortunate, right, to have all of those things. And they have been, part of the acculturation process and part of the assimilation process, part of that cultural erasure, part of the outcome of cultural genocide, right? So I think, at least, in my classrooms, I teach freshman composition, I teach advanced composition. These are these writing classes. I want students to know who they are, because this is a time in their life when they're on the path to becoming a professional of some sort, whether it's a social worker or a nurse or a probation officer, somebody that works with computers, lo que sea. I want them to know who they are and to know why they're pursuing those careers and to really understand what they want to contribute to that field. So for me, rigorous self-reflection is really important. And so I try to tie these strands or weave these strands together to help facilitate that process for students. And I also use a human development holistic approach. So contextual factors that impact the stages of our life, right, which have to do with political factors, historical factors, geographical factors, all that. And all of that has an impact on our mind, our body, our spirit, emotions. It has an impact. It had an impact and continues to have an impact on that of our family members and our community members, right? And so we bring all of these things together in my classes, and I think that's how I address those that are most marginalized, and I'll have an example in a minute. I'm not going to read all this, but in the Google, there's I have the syllabus there for my freshman comp 1A that I taught last year. There's an assignment that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I have the link, the PDF of Teaching as a Healing Craft. I have the HSI statement, statement of affirmation. So you all going to have that. And then I have some other links that I'll talk about later. I just want to say here, this is my part of my English syllabus, right? So just reminding the students, right, that historical factors will be examined that center the Chicano experience. They're going to be looking at foundational texts of the movement, but also contemporary voices. I give them that statistic about that who's at our campus. It has over 50% students labeled as Hispanic, which we just went over. That's really Mexican, right? Over 50% are self-identifying as Mexican or Mexican ancestry. And so given that information, that statistical information, I encourage students to ask themselves about the opportunities they've had in their schooling experience to learn in depth about this very diverse population that is quite abundant in California. And when have they had the opportunity to compare or contrast this ethnic group with their own in ways that are authentic and empowering, right? So my goal is to provide this type of experience for students in order to amplify their worldview and meet the historical moment, which demands anti-racist educational foundations that enhance both critical thinking and critical consciousness. So again, embracing that continued self-exploration and rigorous self-reflection is definitely a priority in the class. And then I'll talk about the assignment next, pero se me atoró aquí la cosa. What's up? Ya no quiere. Let's see. Oh, I think my computer froze. Ya estamos. Can you still hear me?
You're still good, Silvia.
A ver, ¿cómo le hago, Santiago, to get my slide back up? Or what do you see?
No, you're good.
Pero ¿qué ven? What's on the screen? Because I can't move my screen.
I can see your syllabus.
Okay, I want to move on to the next one.
I can see your
Let's
syllabus.
stop sharing your screen and then.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Anything up with the comments? I see some stuff going on in there. Can I get an update?
Let's see. We got great syllabus intro. David Chavez. We got a couple of hearts. Okay. Eva. Thank you, community, for this amazing space. Gracias, and my apologies for leaving mid-lecture. I'm going to try to join you all in October if you want to connect, and she leaves her information. David Chavez right here. I'm wondering, do we push the internationalism of Chicanx studies for our students? So that looks like a question right there. If do we push the internationalism of Chicanx studies for our students? I remember that being one of the questions at the first Raza Studies Now conference is the institutionalization, the internationalism of Chicanx studies for our students. So beyond, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because
David corrected his statement. He said, sorry, I meant to say, how do we do it?
Oh, did he correct it? Okay.
Yeah, right. So it's through this ethnic identity development. Like, how do you identify, and how did you learn? Who taught you to identify that way? Like the labels that you choose. Who taught you that? Where did you learn that from? You know, those are epistemological. How do you know what you know? Types of questions. And so many of the students, you know, their parents or their grandparents came from Mexico, or they came from Central America, and that gets that conversation going already. And we have to consider what was going on in those countries as to why the family members even made it up here, you know, and it gives students access to begin to have questions, you know, meaningful conversations with family members if that's the way they want to go. And it ends up becoming, you know, a very transformative experience, or it has the potential to, because they're reflecting on that. And, you know, typically classrooms don't give students the space to do that. So the assignment, I'm just going to leave it like this without doing the whole thing, because I think it's still going to freeze. So this was an assignment that we did. It was a second essay, if I'm not mistaken. And it was in response to a unit on reviewing the literature of Aztlán. And so you'll see the required readings there. One by Alurista, I Am Joaquin, In Search of My Papa's Marble Hundreds by Maria Figueroa, a few poems by InMichoacán Tesosomoc, We're Not Mestizos, We Are Native Americans by Orozco, 4 major ethnic Mexican American typologies, and the Vendido character. So the emphasis of this unit, so they read all that. There's some videos, you know, we watched some videos. There's some conversation, there's some, I do use low stakes assignments. There are some low stakes assignments that are just, again, getting students to reflect. And these are online classes, so it's like the Post-it I can't really use online, or I haven't been able to in the last couple of years. So the emphasis of this unit was on creation and the empowering role it plays in identity formation and expression. Right. The purpose was to provide students an opportunity to gain appreciation of the role critically conscious cultural productions from the era of the Chicano movement all the way up into the present. Right. So it's that combination. And then the emphasis was for students to connect to their own creativity as they continue to explore their Chicano, Chicanx identities and the relevance to their own lived experiences, right? So that was the assignment. And then the writing task had 2 parts. So they had to analyze the ways in which the works of Alurista and Orozco applied to the poems. So Alurista and Orozco are talking about themes, right? Themes about racism, classism, intersectionality. They're talking about identity formations. So there's like the theoretical part, and then I have them apply that to the poems, right? And then the second part was basically, you know, how for the students to evaluate the impact the works in Unit 2 have had on their holistic view of their own identity development, right? So now we read all this, there's all this content. So what's it doing to you? This is like a big Post-it. Right? So like the essay is like a giant Post-it for them to consider this identity development in their mind, their body, their spirit, and emotions. And so I wanted them to create a critically conscious cultural production. And then there's some guidelines there. You know, Bloom's taxonomy, I use it. I keep saying I'm going to do a decolonized Bloom's taxonomy. It'll be one of my projects. But at the top of Bloom's taxonomy is creativity. And that is the most sophisticated skill right in that graphic. And it develops as a result of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, and evaluating. So to be creative is so important. It's such a high skill, like cognitive skill, ¿verdad? And so there was reflections, you know, encouraged along the way. And so some of the enhancements that I've used in this class, Santiago, you have a question?
Yeah, I think we had a question here. I think it was Alejandro. It says, I'm curious to know how Central American or non-Mexican students respond to this assignment. Silvia?
I'm going to tell you. We're about to get there. All right, so I'm going to end it with that. So one of the enhancements that I used for this particular unit in particular, we did another Indigenous Peoples Day in 2021. And we invited many of the contributing authors of the book In Search of Our Brown Selves to just share your work, read from your work, share from it. How did you get to it, you know? So Professor Tony Sandoval de Sosomo Cayocuan, he read his poems. He read them in Nahuatl. He created these beautiful images. He's so involved and active, and I linked you in your resource, Google. I linked you to that Zoom. It's about 4 hours long, super content, but you could look through it, you could skim through it, and you'll have access to his poems and his graphics y todo eso, his voice. You can see his beautiful smile right there. So that students could really have a visceral experience of the importance of creation, right? Of creativity. And then there's a panel that we did with Professor Jose Maldonado, Oscar Medina, Gustavo Garcia, and Cristian Valdez. They're all graduate students in Chicano Studies, if I'm not mistaken. So we did a panel on Chicano, Chicanx, like what is the difference? What do all these terms mean? Who are they for? Right? How do these individuals use them? And it's been a really important resource. It's been very useful in helping students gain a better understanding of the terms, the history of the terms, the nuances and complexities of the terms, and why the terms are important and continue to be valid today, right? So you also have access to that link in your in the Google. How much time do I have? Hello.
You're just about done. I think that's it.
No. All right. So let me take a little bit of that time extra because this is really important. I want to address the question that came up. So Kelvin Melgar Alas was a student of mine in fall 2021, English 1A. And he's identifies as a Salvi, according to him, right? Salvi Chicano. And in response to this assignment, he wrote this poem. And this was his first poem that he ever wrote. So I got permission from him. He said he was not a people person to be reading this out loud, pero me dio permiso. So I want to ask for extra time to share his words. He also, una foto que he included with his picture. And I hope that this answers the question. Growing up, watching El Veterano iron his clothes, so much passion, every single pass, one of force. As he pressed the iron against the ironing board, every crease straight in the center. We all knew he was el veterano and not a vendido. I asked why cholos would wear dickies. I remember the story he told as he drank his Mickey. El veterano told me with his prison tone, he said that a well-pressed shirt and pants speak louder than words, in the street as well as behind the big, tall walls. That back before the Pachuco days, they did roll like that. The first homies went to county jail. Guards tried to make them look like clowns, giving the homies the bigger pants, just because of the color of skin, brown. Little did they know that the humiliation became the homies' proud tradition. Me, junior high school, 12 years old, I was ironing pants, t-shirts, trying to be like El Veterano. Decades later, me, ironing khakis in federal prison. All I could remember were all those famous speeches of prisoners of war I used to get from my dear veterano hermano. So to close it out, right, these methods do meet our most marginalized students where they're at. This is Kelvin right here. And he gave me permission to also share the photo, right? And so it's important that we help facilitate student empowerment. And I think another thing that I wanted to emphasize was that it's the intuitive practice as well that's so important. You know, I know it's about tools and gaining resources and having access, but one of my greatest tools is my intuition and my authenticity. And in one of the videos, he heard me say Tlazo Kamati, and we automatically clicked. And he said, I thought I would never hear a person in my classroom, especially a professor, greet me with the Tlazo Kamati, right? The Nahuatl term for thank you. Y pues con eso los dejo. The point of the presentation was to suggest that In Search of Our Brown Selves could be a racially equitable learning outcome for our most marginalized and underrepresented students. Tlazo Kamati.
Tlazo Kamati. Thank you, Silvia. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but just like the cadence of the speakers and just like hearing from y'all, it's just for me creating just a deep reflection, you know, about all the faces of young folks that I've worked with and colleagues I've had and people that have inspired me along the journey. And so what I'm really pulling away from your talk is just the importance of that creative energy. I remember it was Jorge Gonzalez that said something along the lines of, there's no revolution without poetry. And I feel like there's it simultaneously, right? There's like no critical consciousness without that like fire of art and that creative energy of the spoken word. And that's what brought me to critical consciousness. That's what brought me to racial justice, ethnic studies, and social justice. And I wish I had a guide like you when I was a youngster to be able to guide that path. And so what a beautiful opportunity for the young people that walk through your classroom and they get to meet you and understand those experiences. So thank you. Deeply inspired. I love also like the transdisciplinary is something that's speaking to me a lot as well. So there's a lot of comments and ideas coming from the chat box, a lot of questions and affirmations. So I'm gonna go to it. There was a few questions and comments that came up. If people would like to speak to them, you're welcome to. United Caltrans had a comment. If you're able to unmute yourself, please do so. If not, I can also read your comment.
Yeah. My name's Roberto Flores.
Hi, Roberto.
Hi. Yeah, and thank you for everything. And yeah, I need to get in touch. But Yeah, I was just thinking, we are coming up on the baptism of fire of the Chicana movement and its identity. August 29, 1970, the anti-war moratorium was an international act by the Chicano Latinx people, and a reflection of our international perspective and approach. Being against the Vietnam War and all the wars was a contribution from the Chicanx, Latinx people to all of humanity. So it just, the approach and the questions and the discussion just kind of triggered that thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Questions, comments, feedback, ideas for Silvia?
We have a hand up. Sean Arce.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Tlaxcomati, Silvia, thank you so much for your palabra, as always. Just wanted to comment and give you, much due recognition in your documentation of Chicano, Chicanx, Indigenous epistemologies, and how foundational that was for all of us within Chicano studies in terms of further affirming our indigeneity, number one, and then, helping us in our struggle. Not only, that was key to articulating our legal struggle in Arizona, which we were victorious. But also, I think it's even more so and equally and sometimes more important is our spiritual struggle, right? Our spiritual struggle and our struggle as to affirm our humanity in centering these knowledges. So I'd just like to thank you, sister, for all your work and your continued work. Tlaxcomati.
Yeah, now it's all y'all up in Arizona that had all that clicking for me. So likewise, that's what I'm at.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Sean. Lucha and Ron.
Trying to give wait time for folks to ask questions.
Okay.
I think there's a question
In the
in
chat.
the Q&A. This question is for Silvia. Could you share strategies for HSI grant writing as a faculty member? Going to start a tenure track job this fall. Shout out to David at Compton Community College, and wanting to get involved and would like any advice, best practices, consejos. So if you could, just shine some light on this question. And I think this is going to be our last question before we get to the next speaker.
That's a big one, David. Congratulations on that tenure track.
Where's David going to?
Where are you going so we can find you?
Compton Community College.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, the ACLS Malin. The ACLS Malin one. Lucha just got it. Apply to that one.
It's such an important, yeah. So for grant writing, you want to talk to Santiago and Lucha because they got the outside. So the grants that I write are for in-house within the institution. So you want to check if who is in the office of like equity, inclusion, diversity, right? In 2015, there was a push for equity, and all campuses, all community colleges received a lot of money. They received millions of dollars. So many campuses have no idea what to do with that money. So you just have to be very careful, right? Because you're going to be new, you're going to be first year, they're going to veer you off into like other places, and they might say, oh, you don't want to go there right now. Maybe not, maybe they want you to go running right in there. It kind of depends. So you want to feel that out. And what discipline, David, can you tell us?
Yeah, history and ethnic studies.
Yeah, okay, so you got hired specifically for who you are and what you know. So they're going to be looking at you for that. So that's cool. Yeah, just start asking those questions, like if they have the new faculty hire orientation, like something like that, you want to start asking whoever is supposed to be guiding you, right, mentoring you in that first year, just start to ask those general questions about, who's doing equity, diversity, inclusion. Are there opportunities for faculty members to apply for grants? And when does that become, appropriate for a new faculty member? Things like that. And it's just a matter of observing and getting to know who's doing what. I will tell you very briefly that the grant work is it's a bureaucracy, and there's a lot of bullshit in there. And there's a lot of shit talking. There's a lot of talking, and nothing happening. Right? That's across the board, I'm sure, at almost every institution, because we're in these institutions. That's where we are. So just be ready for that, and it's not something you have to do from the get-go. You'll get there. You'll get there. And I would say también find your allies, just observe and see who resonates with you. And it'll all kind of work itself out in an organic way. And you can totally hit me up, email me, we'll talk, and we can do more in-depth conversations about it.